So we can talk about COVID-19 in a good sense. Victoria scored the 000 today. No deaths, no infections, no active cases. That will change, though, when travellers return to Victoria from foreign lands on December the 7th. And then hotel quarantine is back up and running. That's right. Cross your fingers very hard, maybe your toes as well. And Queensland has finally opened its borders to New South Wales from December 1 and likely to Victoria if Victoria scores another infection-free tally tomorrow morning. Now, how long that border will stay open will depend on how nervous they get. If a cluster occurs maybe in Victoria or New South Wales, which can easily happen. It can easily happen. It is not eradicated, and I'll tell you how not eradicated it is. Today, wastewater analysis showed that the virus was in the Liverpool area of Sydney, and 39 suburbs today have been placed on alert. So maybe you should think twice before booking those Christmas flights north, or at least check the refund policy. But more seriously, we've learned a lot more today about the mayhem surrounding hotel quarantine. Just when we thought Victoria's slack approach was world's worst practice, leading to the deaths of 800 people, we discovered today, thanks to the publication of minutes from a New South Wales government meeting last month, that 169 security guards were sacked. This is in New South Wales, and 4 returned travellers escaped from hotels. Did a runner. It is astonishing when you think of that New South Wales didn't have its own second wave. Meanwhile, it's been revealed that the New South Wales scheme is at breaking point. But then again, is it any wonder, given the fact that New South Wales has been doing all the heavy lifting? And we've also had suggestions from an infection control expert that to alleviate the pressure and manage any possible outbreak from hotels, it could be time to assign regional venues to take up the slack. So to talk about all of this, I was joined earlier today by Global Biosecurity Professor Raina MacIntyre. Professor, thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
What did you think of these government minutes which were reported today? Government minutes from New South Wales that show that 169 security guards were sacked from hotel quarantine, and on top of that, 4 overseas travellers escaped from quarantine. Does that surprise you?
Look, I think we've seen throughout the pandemic that we've had breaches of different kinds. I think we can expect that at times things won't flow smoothly and that there will be problems. So it doesn't surprise me, no.
And we've had reports from contact tracing history in Victoria where some people weren't even contacted within 3 days of them being infected, and so therefore their contacts weren't contacted and their contacts weren't contacted either. When they get back to taking hotel quarantine travelling passengers, this could be a worry if they haven't filled these gaps.
Yeah, so my understanding is that at the peak of the epidemic in Victoria around July, that the number of cases was so great that they couldn't keep up with the contact tracing and there were delays in contact tracing. So for every case, there might have been 10 to 20 contacts. So on a day when they were having 500 cases a day, there might have been 5,000 or 10,000 contacts to trace. And you can imagine if you don't get through all of those within 24 hours, you're going to have a bigger and bigger backlog each day. And I think that's what happened. It's a slightly different situation with the hotel quarantine because it's generally a fixed number of people that are coming in. It's not going to be snowballing and kind of growing exponentially as it was during the peak of the epidemic.
So you're relatively confident about the level of contact tracing and the security within hotel quarantine around the country?
I think in Victoria, certainly they've expanded their capacity to do contact tracing, and really all states and territories should expand their capacity, because if an epidemic gets too big, then no state, not even New South Wales, will be able to keep up with the contact tracing. And unless you use digital contact tracing methods, then you could end up losing control of the epidemic. In terms of the hotel quarantine, I think we just have to see how it goes. It's better than voluntary home quarantine, which is what we had at the beginning of the year. If you remember back in March, people were asked to just quarantine at home, and there were people breaching it. And that's why we switched to hotel quarantines. I think it's important we keep that up and the system is as good as it can be.
New South Wales is reporting that they are under a great deal of pressure because of sheer numbers of overseas travellers returning home, clearly because of Christmas coming up. Should we be thinking about moving some of these headquarters for quarantine to regional centres, maybe larger country towns?
Look, I think all solutions should be seriously explored. We know that there were some 35,000 plus Australians stranded overseas trying to get back. Perhaps we could set up, something like the facilities in, like the initial evacuations from Wuhan. People went to Christmas Island and it was managed in one place, off sort of away from the big cities. That's another option to bring in larger volumes of people. And I think it is important we try and get home the 35,000 Australians who are stuck overseas.
So maybe using some of the properties that have been used in the Northern Territory and Christmas Island, especially as the rush is on. And there are some calls for country towns to also be included in the hotel quarantine protocols. I guess that would be one way to limit the damage if people escaped, or limit the damage if the virus got out?
Yeah, I mean, smaller towns, obviously, with smaller populations, lower population density. If there is some kind of breach, the risk of a large epidemic taking off is less, and the ability to contain it will be easier than in a big city. So I think that all those solutions should be seriously considered.
I wonder how permanent we should be considering hotel quarantining in this country, given the fact that by the time we hope that a large percentage of the population takes the vaccine, it could be 18 months to 2 years away. So we may be using hotel quarantine for at least 18 months.
I hope it's not 18 months away. I really hope that we'd see vaccination by the middle of next year, most people taking it. I think the other option is to make vaccination a requirement for overseas travel. In the same way that we have yellow fever vaccination requirements, you can't come into Australia if you've travelled to certain countries without the yellow fever vaccine. I think it could be just something that has to be done to enable travel, and that would remove some of those other restrictions like quarantine if you were vaccinated.
Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense. I know that Qantas has come out last night to say something similar, that they're trying to put in a permanent protocol of you must get a vaccination or a jab or no fly. And maybe this is something that all the international airlines should do. You make a good point. What about the vaccine that we've heard about recently, and the one that we could get access to in March next year? How confident are you that this will provide Australians what we need?
Well, I think we've heard preliminary results on 4 different vaccines now from the phase 3 trials, and all of them seem to be highly effective. The latest one that we've heard the results on yesterday was the AstraZeneca trial, which overall it was 70%, which looked a bit lower than the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, which are over 90%. But when that was broken down, there was actually one particular dosing schedule with the AstraZeneca vaccine that was 90% effective. So that's very promising. I think the fact that we're seeing these high efficacy data from multiple different vaccines is really promising, although none of them have been published in a peer-reviewed journal yet. We're just going on what the companies have released in their press releases.